You are hungry, irritable, frowning at the screen, typing an unfinished email, unable to concentrate on anything. You are very uncomfortable. Imagine you are not sitting in an office. You are in the middle of the Yamagata Mountains in northern Japan, 900 years ago. A thin kasaya robe, pitifully thin, covering a skeleton reduced to nothing but skin stretched over bone. Pine bark, pine needles, forest roots, the things your body has lived on for 8 years without touching a single grain of rice. And yet you walk down into a stone underground chamber beneath the mountain on your own 2 feet and sit in the lotus meditation posture. Why? Seriously think about this for a moment. A body starved for 8 years should have collapsed in the first week like a building with all its pillars pulled out. But it does not collapse, it almost never collapses, and the reason is not just one thing. There are many layers of explanation, each stranger than the one before, that together paint a strange capacity inside every human being. A capacity older than religion, older than agriculture, older than anything we usually think of as human history. This goes deep. Begin with something that sounds like a dry scientific statement, but is actually one of the strangest truths about your body. Hunger is not your enemy. The hunger clawing at your stomach right now, as you hear this, is probably uncomfortable, annoying, not particularly pleasant. But hunger as a biological phenomenon for your brain is genuinely strange and profound from an evolutionary point of view. Not in the obvious way you feel it. It has no color, it has no sound, it is not particularly intelligent for the size of a sensation. It does not even have a specific shape in the mind. On paper, hunger is a fairly ordinary, uncomfortable feeling like many others. Yet a groundbreaking review published in 2018 in Nature Reviews Neuroscience by Mark Mattson, professor of neuroscience at Johns Hopkins University and former chief of the Laboratory of Neurosciences at the National Institute on Aging, found something remarkable. He put forward a core thesis based on decades of research in his own lab and many other groups around the world. An ordinary thesis, just a few declarative sentences, and the entire neuroscience community was stunned. He said, with the calm pace of a scientist who has checked the data many times, and in many cases even more directly, food scarcity is the single most prominent force that shaped the human brain during evolution. These are scientists who have examined thousands of animal models as if it were nothing. People who can track every neurotransmitter in the flowing blood. People who are absolute units of objective research efficiency. And they hear one declarative sentence and are stunned. That is not a one-off result. A similar chain of evidence shows that when you stop eating for 12 to 24 hours, your glycogen stores are depleted and the body switches channels. The liver begins producing ketone bodies from fat to replace glucose as fuel. Beta-hydroxybutyrate, abbreviated BHB, surges in the blood. From a survival perspective, that is a massive reversal. A brain switching fuel midway is essentially operating in emergency mode. The energy supply to the brain does not stop. And it continues to function because the advantage of staying alert in hunger outweighs the cost of remaining dependent on satiety. That result confirms something biologists have noticed for decades. BDNF, the nerve growth factor that scientists jokingly call the brain's growth hormone, rises sharply when you are hungry. Mitochondrial biogenesis is activated. Cells create more new energy factories right in the middle of fuel shortage. Autophagy starts. Antioxidant capacity increases. Control of the glutamatergic neural network improves. This is not a brain about to collapse. This is a brain that decided at the molecular level over millions of years that hunger is not a threat. Hunger is a signal, and the reason for that is one of the strangest truths in human biology. Your brain is designed for this. It is only waiting for you to try. But Mattson is not the only one who has touched this truth. At the molecular level, far deeper than what hormones and neurotransmitters can tell, there is an even stranger discovery. In 2016, the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine was awarded to a Japanese cell biologist named Yoshinori Ohsumi. He did not discover a new drug. He did not cure any specific disease. He simply demonstrated one simple thing, and it was precisely that simplicity that stunned the scientific community. Inside every one of your cells, there is a self-eating mechanism that is activated when the body is starved. And this mechanism is not only in humans. Yeast has it. Yeast, the tiny single-celled organism you use to make bread, has the same machine. Plants have it, fish have it, fruit flies have it, mice have it. Every eukaryotic organism, meaning every organism with a cell nucleus on this planet, carries that machine inside it. There are only a few variations, but the root principle is one. And this is where the story begins to touch a depth of time that makes one dizzy. This machine is older than 1.5 billion years. It predates animals, it predates the brain, it predates the complex life you know. The molecular mechanism of fasting is not a human invention, it is the inheritance of life. You inherited it, completely free, long before you ever appeared on Earth. But to understand why that billion-year-old machine became a defining feature of the human brain, we must go back a span of time whose numbers sound abstract but are actually very concrete. Roughly 2 million to 1.5 million years ago, the period paleoclimatologists call the Pleo-Pleistocene transition. This is when Africa, the cradle from which every human species that ever existed originated, entered a cycle of intense aridification. Average temperatures dropped. Tropical forests shrank. Savanna grasslands expanded to take their place. The juicy fruits, tender leaves and soft tubers that hominid ancestors had eaten for millions of years before began to decline in both quantity and quality. At the same time, climate fluctuations became unpredictable to an unprecedented degree. Rain did not arrive on schedule. Droughts struck suddenly. A forest that had fruit this year might be empty the next. Food became something that could not be trusted. There were days of plenty, weeks of nothing. Seasons of abundance, years when the whole band ate only enough to stay alive and watched one another to see who still had the strength to stand up. This was the forge, not in a literary sense but in an extremely dark and direct sense. Over a span of time you cannot imagine in ordinary human lifetimes, natural selection did something ruthless but simple. Individuals whose brains went numb when hungry, individuals who sat down and faded when their stomachs were empty, individuals who could not calculate clearly when glycogen ran out, died before they found the next meal, died in silence, left no genes, left no trace in the lineage that leads to you. Individuals whose brains worked better when hungry, who became sharper, more alert, more decisive when hunger clawed at the belly, lived, found the meal, reproduced, passed on the genes. That process repeated not for 100 generations, but for hundreds of thousands of continuous generations without rest. And what remains in your DNA from that chain of selection is a strange truth that most modern people have never tested on themselves. Hunger does not weaken you at the neural level. Hunger awakens you. It switches on a mode that opens only when the body believes the next meal depends on your finding it, and finding it fast. This is why hunters in many traditional cultures do not eat before going out to hunt, not because of superstition, but because thousands of years of experience taught them that a hungry brain hunts better than a full one. And what makes this astonishingly strange is that the molecular machine that runs that mode was already present 1 billion years before your first ancestors stood upright on the African grasslands. Usumi began the work that led him to the Nobel in the early 1990s, with a model so simple it is almost ridiculous compared with the eventual stature of the discovery. He did not use mice. He did not use human cells. He used yeast, the cheap single-celled organism any biology lab has on hand. He grew the yeast in a nitrogen-deficient medium to simulate cellular starvation, then sat for hours observing under the electron microscope, and what he saw in those hours changed molecular biology. The word he and his colleagues used to name the phenomenon is autophagy, a word of Greek origin. Auto means self. Phagene means to eat. Put together, self-eating. That machine operates according to a logic so precise it is beautiful. Inside the cell there is a protein called TOR, short for target of rapamycin, a kind of central control switch. When the cell is nutrient-rich, when amino acids, sugars and fats are abundant, TOR switches on and locks autophagy down. It forbids the cell from eating itself. But when the cell is starved, when the external supply runs dry, TOR is inactivated. Immediately a protein named ATTeg13 is dephosphorylated, binds to another protein named ATTeg1, and forms the complex that starts the entire cascade. Inside the cell, double membrane vesicles called autophagosomes begin to appear. These vesicles crawl around, wrap up damaged organelles, misfolded proteins, even old mitochondria that no longer produce energy efficiently, and deliver them to the lysosome, the cell's digestive organ. There everything is broken down and recycled into amino acids and new raw materials, ready to be used again to build new components. In other words, when you fast for more than 24 hours, your body literally begins to eat itself. But this is not simple destruction, not the desperate gnawing of a machine about to collapse. It eats only the parts that are old, damaged, no longer serving well, in order to free materials for the new. This is the rejuvenation machine your ancestors used for 2 million years on the African savanna without ever knowing they were using it. No one lectured them about Tor. No one drew them a diagram of ACH13. The machine simply ran, silently, every time their stomach stayed empty long enough. Usumi received the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 2016. But if you ask him whether he invented autophagy, the honest answer is no. He only found the name and the blueprint of the gears of a machine that had already been running silently inside every eukaryotic cell for 1.5 billion years. But the story does not stop at the cellular level. What happens in the brain when the body is hungry is far stranger still. 24 hours without food. What is happening inside your head at that moment, at a level you cannot feel directly but that can be measured by machines? Neuroscientists have used SPECT imaging, a form of brain scanning that uses radioactive tracers to track the activity of receptors and transporters, to answer this exact question. And the results they found are so strange that at first glance they look like a technical error. After 24 hours of fasting, the availability of the serotonin transporter, abbreviated CAT, in the human hypothalamus increases markedly compared with the normal fed state. Serotonin, the neurotransmitter you may have heard of when someone talks about antidepressants, does not only regulate mood, it regulates perception, regulates attention, regulates the very state of consciousness you are experiencing right now. When you are hungry long enough, the serotonin system inside your head is recalibrated in a way that never eating much can never produce. And there is one specific receptor in that system that becomes significantly more sensitive. Its scientific name is 5-HT2A. The detail you need to hear twice to absorb is this one. 5-HT2A is the very same receptor that LSD activates to produce visual hallucinations. It is the very same receptor that psilocybin, the active compound in magic mushrooms, activates to open the mystical experiences users have described for thousands of years. It is the very same receptor that DMT, the active compound in the ayahuasca of Amazonian shamans, exploits to take people through doors for which everyday language has no words. The same receptor, not similar, not analogous, exactly it. When you fast long enough, your brain is approaching a chemical state that belongs to the same family as those states. Not identical, not as strong, but the same system, the same biological gateway. Add many other layers. The ketone body BHB replaces glucose as the primary fuel for the brain. GABA, the inhibitory neurotransmitter that keeps your mind stable in daily life, is readjusted in a different direction. The entire network shifts from a stability mode into a search mode, a state neuroscience calls enhanced cognition. And this is when visions begin to make neural sense. Not miracle, not superstition, not someone imagining things to deceive you. Chemistry, electricity, what your brain does when it believes your fate depends on seeing something, anything, a pattern, an image, an answer that might save you from hunger. In other words, your brain has an emergency mode, not a mode for surviving, a mode for finding a way to survive, and that mode opens only when you are hungry. And someone in prehistory discovered that mode. We know because they left evidence so clear it cannot be denied, and that evidence lies deep under a rock shelter in northern Israel. In 2008, the journal PNAS, short for Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, one of the most prestigious scientific journals in the world, published a paper led by 3 archaeologists, Leah A. Grossman, Natalie Munro, and Annabelle Cohen. The research site was Hilazon Taktit Cave in Western Galilee, Israel. The date of what they found makes the number need to be read slowly. 12,000 years ago. Inside the cave they excavated a single grave, not a collective burial, not an ordinary cemetery. A grave for one person alone. In the grave was a small woman, about 45 years old at death, whose spine was congenitally deformed so that she walked with great difficulty all her life. She was not a healthy person. She was not a warrior either. But what was buried with her tells a completely different story. Around the body were 50 complete tortoise shells carefully arranged, a leopard's pelvis, a pair of wings from a golden eagle, the largest bird of prey in the region, a wild cattle tail, 2 stone marten skulls placed symmetrically, a wild boar's forelimb placed straight, touching her left arm, as if deliberately arranged, and one detail that made the archaeologist pause longest, a human foot belonging to another adult, much taller than she was, placed right in the grave as a ritual object. This is the oldest shaman grave ever found by humankind. There is no major dispute among archaeologists about that. But the historical context of this grave is even stranger than what is inside it. The Natufians, the community she belonged to, were living through an extremely special transitional period in human history. They were shifting from hunting and gathering toward settled life, toward early agriculture, toward the first deliberate planting of wheat and barley to control the food supply. This is the hinge moment of the entire human species, a moment that had never existed before and would never return. For the first time in our evolutionary history, hunger was no longer an unavoidable fate, and it is precisely at that moment, not earlier, not later, that voluntary fasting becomes a meaningful behavior. Before agriculture, hunger was something that happened to you. After agriculture, hunger is something you do. Hunger becomes a choice, and the choice of hunger becomes the way humans distinguish themselves from animals, by refusing the most basic instinct that 2 million years of evolution had installed deep inside them. The Hilazon Taktit shaman was not the last to do it. She is only the first we have found. From the Galilee cave, jump forward about 11,000 years and a few thousand kilometers east to Karnataka, a region in southern India, in the year 869 of the Common Era. A stone stele was erected. The person who inscribed it was Prince Satyavakya. The person commemorated was his father, King Eriganga Nittimarga I of the Western Ganga dynasty. On the face of the stele, the carving shows the king lying on a low bed, his head resting on a double pillow, his face so calm it almost has no expression. He was not killed. He did not die of disease. He was performing sallekhana, the ritual of voluntary death by gradually reducing food according to a Jain religious vow. This stele is known in archaeology as the Dodahundi Nishidi inscription, one of the oldest surviving stone records of the practice. But sallekhana did not begin there. The Akaranga Sutra, a core Jain text dating from the 5th century before the Common Era, already describes in detail 3 forms of the practice. The Bhagavati Sutra describes sallekhana performed by the direct disciples of Mahavira, the founder of the tradition. That means the practice already had a name, rules, and ritual at least 2,500 years ago. From the 7th century of the Common Era onward, Nishidi steles begin to appear all over Shravanabalagola, carved with images of emaciated monks in their final meditation posture, eyes closed, hands folded before the chest. The important distinction that must be understood clearly, because if it is misunderstood, the whole story will be read wrong. According to Jain doctrine, sallekhana is not suicide. There is no passion, no despair, no weapon, no poison, no impulsive moment. Only the gradual reduction of food and water according to a public vow, lasting not a few days but usually many years, until the final moment of meditation. The vow is permitted only when death is already near, when old age or terminal illness has arrived, when a person believes their life has completed every responsibility. Archaeological evidence shows a scale far larger than a few isolated cases. A Karnataka family living in the 12th and 13th centuries, discovered through steles at Henaru and Haveri, had 6 people perform sallekhana at different times. Father, mother, brothers and sisters all chose this path when their time came. The point that needs emphasis is the one modern people find hardest to imagine, that society did not regard sallekhana as pathology, did not regard it as despair, did not regard it as failure. They regarded it as the highest path of liberation, worthy of being carved in stone so that thousands of years later it would still be remembered. But India was not the only place that pushed hunger to the limit. In Japan, people went one step further still. Yamagata, northern Japan, a cold and damp mountain range lying between the sea and the inland plain. Between the years 1081 and 1903, over a continuous span of about 8 centuries, roughly 20 monks of the Shingon lineage successfully completed a process that, if you heard it for the first time, you might think was a fictional horror story. But it is not fiction. It has a name, has dates, has authenticated remains that still sit intact in temples to this day. Beyond those 20 successful ones, historians estimate hundreds of other monks tried and failed, their bodies decomposed normally, and their names vanished from history. The process lasts 3,000 days, exactly 10 years, divided into 3 stages of 1,000 days each, every stage harsher than the one before. Stage 1 is called Mokujikigo, which translates roughly as the practice of eating trees. The monk completely abandons all grains. He eats only nuts, forest fruits and roots gathered directly on Mount Udono. At the same time, he trains rigorously every day to burn off every bit of fat in the body. The reason is very direct and not the least romantic. Fat is the ideal medium for bacteria that cause decay after death, and if fat remains, the body will rot. Stage 2. Another 1,000 days. The monk eats only pine bark, pine needles, pine roots, things that are hard to digest and almost devoid of nutritional value. The body continues to waste until only skin over bone remains. Consciousness begins to drift among the states described in the previous section, at the level of neuroscience. Stage 3 is the most chemically bizarre. The monk drinks tea made from the sap of the urushi tree, the same sap used to lacquer traditional Japanese lacquerware, related to the itch-causing substance in Western poison ivy. This tea makes his body toxic from the inside to bacteria and insects, an internal preparation for preservation after death. Finally, when the 3 stages are complete, the monk is lowered by his disciples into a stone underground chamber beneath the mountain, sized just large enough for one person to sit in the lotus posture. Inside the chamber with him are only 2 objects, a small bell and a bamboo tube rising to the surface to bring air down. Once a day he rings the bell so those above know he is still alive. On the day the bell stops ringing, the disciples pull out the bamboo tube and seal the chamber. 1,000 days later they open it. If the body has not decomposed, if he has become sokushinbutsu, Buddha in this body, he is brought up, dressed in a new kasaya, and placed in the temple as an object of worship for the entire village. Emperor Meiji officially banned the practice in 1879, but the sokushinbutsu completed before that still remain. 6 of them are still sitting in the temples of Dewa Sanzan to this very day. What needs to be said straight here is what any careful reader should hear. What these monks did is not something anyone should imitate. This is the farthest point on the map of human possibility, the point that proves how far this species can go when it believes hunger opens a door. Look in order to understand, not in order to copy. But between your irritable 3 o'clock hunger and the 10-year wait for death of monks like Tetsumunkai, there is an entire wide spectrum of behavior that every major culture of humankind has entered to some degree. Look across the world and you will see that spectrum so clearly it cannot be ignored. Ramadan, Muslims fasting from dawn to sunset for 30 consecutive days every year according to the lunar calendar. As long as the sun is in the sky, the stomach stays empty. Lent, Christians abstaining for 40 days before Easter, a span long enough that it shaped the rhythm of entire communities for more than a millennium in Europe. Yom Kippur, Jews fasting completely for 25 hours every year. No food, no drink, not even a sip of water. The vision quest of native North Americans, a young person coming of age going alone onto a sacred mountain for 4 days and 4 nights without food or water, waiting for a spirit animal or ancestral spirit to appear and show him who he is. The sun dance of the Lakota Sioux, fasting combined with continuous dancing for many days and wooden skewers piercing the chest skin and attached by leather thongs to a central pole. Michael Winkelmann, an anthropologist who spent decades studying shamanism cross-culturally, recorded something remarkable after surveying hundreds of different communities. Fasting as a spiritual tool appears independently in the majority of hunter-gatherer societies that anthropology has ever studied, from Siberia to the Amazon, from Africa to Australia. Not a few exceptions, not a few scattered traditions. The majority. This is not the result of diffusion. No one flew from India to North America to teach the Lakota to fast. No Jain missionary reached Yamagata before Kukai brought Shingon Buddhism to Japan. The same behavior appears in places thousands of kilometers apart, separated by seas, deserts, mountains and forests, with no channel of communication, no coordination, often with no idea of one another's existence. And this is where the 3 layers of the story converge on a single point. When the same neural machine lies ready inside every human brain, when that machine has been tuned by 2 million years of selection to switch on at the same threshold of hunger, and when every culture that lasts long enough will have someone accidentally cross that threshold and see what is inside it, then the result is not coincidence. It is DNA speaking the same language through thousands of different windows, each window carrying the particular color of the culture that opened it. The same moment of discovery can be wrapped in the kasaya of a Buddhist monk, in the prayer shawl of Yom Kippur, in the eagle feathers of a Lakota shaman. But beneath all those wrappings, the machine is still one. Now, be honest about something. We need to pause here for a beat because if I do not say this, this video will be irresponsible. Exception number 1 is Mesopotamia, the oldest major civilization for which we have complete written evidence. The Sumerians, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, thousands of clay tablets, millions of lines of cuneiform recording their economy, religion, law, and mythology for more than 3,000 years. If voluntary fasting were truly a universal human behavior, we should find it here first. But a 2016 study by the scholar Stefania Emidoro, after surveying the entire surviving cuneiform archive, reaches a conclusion so blunt it is uncomfortable. Communal fasting, organized voluntary fasting, almost does not exist in ancient Mesopotamia. There are only a few rare cases of individual fasting, mostly related to mourning or illness. The significance of that finding is not small. Voluntary fasting is not an automatic universal. It does not spring up everywhere humans are present. It needs to be invented, or inspired, or accidentally discovered in each specific culture. There are large, developed societies with writing and complex religious organization that never took that path. Exception number 2 is that extreme fasting can kill, and not everybody reacts the same way. In the Jain tradition, sallekhana is not for anyone who wants it. It is permitted only when death is already near, when life has completed its responsibilities to family and community, and only with the formal approval of senior monks. With sokushinbutsu, only about 20 people succeeded in more than 8 centuries. Hundreds of others may have died without achieving the result. Their bodies decomposed normally, and their names vanished from history because they did not become Buddha in this body. This is not a game anyone can join. Exception number 3, and perhaps the most important exception in today's context, is the need to distinguish clearly between conscious fasting and pathology. Caroline Walker Bynum, the distinguished medieval historian, in her classic work Holy Feast and Holy Fast, published in 1987, strongly opposed the retrospective diagnosis of medieval female saints such as Catherine of Siena or Angela of Foligno as suffering from anorexia nervosa. She pointed out that the anorexia mirabilis of medieval women existed inside an entirely different framework of meaning, a framework in which the body was regarded as an obstacle between the soul and God, and hunger was regarded as a purposeful path of purification. That was not disease within their framework of meaning. But, and this but needs to be heard clearly, that does not mean every fast today is a spiritual path. Some are real illness. Modern anorexia nervosa has the highest mortality rate of any psychiatric disorder ever recorded. This is a deadly serious matter, not a romanticized game. Closing this critical section, the larger pattern still stands. Although Mesopotamia did not take that path, although the danger is real, although careful distinction between path and pathology is required, the core truth remains unchanged. Humans are the only species in the entire living world that has turned hunger into a meaningful choice. Lions do not fast to seek visions. Eagles do not abstain to purify the soul. Whales do not go on hunger strike to atone to the ocean. Only you and your ancestors did that. No one else in 4 billion years of life on Earth ever invented this idea, and that strange capacity, the capacity to turn the most basic instinct of life into a conscious choice, may have created something else as well, something far larger than just a neural state. There is one final layer I have saved until now, because it changes everything. Return to Mattson. In the 2018 review, he demonstrated that food scarcity shaped the human brain at the level of the individual organism, the cellular level, the neurotransmitter level. That is the story of a single body across 2 million years of selection. But there is a question Mattson did not ask in the paper, and that is precisely the central question of this section. If hunger shaped the biological brain at the individual level, then what did the capacity to turn hunger into vision shape at a higher level still? The chain of logic leading to the answer runs as follows, and every link is supported by archaeological or anthropological evidence. Hunger activates the brain into vision mode. Vision produces a transcendent experience that the experiencer feels as sacred, not as illness, not as imagination, but as contact with something larger than the self. That transcendent experience gives birth to the intermediary, the shaman, the person able to enter that mode and come back out to tell of it. Shamans appear independently in hundreds of societies across the world. When societies become complex enough, individual shamans develop into organized religious systems with scriptures, rituals, and ranks of clergy. Organized religion creates shared morality, shared mythology, a sense of community that extends far beyond the immediate kin group, and that is the prerequisite for thousands of strangers to live together in a city without killing one another. It must be said clearly so as not to exaggerate. Hunger does not necessarily create civilization. Mesopotamia proved there was another path. But the capacity of hunger to open vision, was one of the main machines that pushed humankind from scattered hunting bands towards societies with pantheons, sacred law, and the idea of an order larger than the individual. Not the only machine, but one of the most important. And now look at the present scale. Today, roughly 1,900,000,000 Muslims practice Ramadan every year. Roughly 2,400,000,000 Christians worldwide observe Lent to varying degrees. 15 million Jews fast on Yom Kippur. Added together, more than half the population of Earth participates in some form of organized fasting every year. Every year, every season, every festival, 4 billion human beings are repeating a mild version of the same neural discovery that a female shaman in a Galilee cave stumbled upon 12,000 years ago. They do not know, they do not think of her when they fast. But the same molecular machine still starts inside their cells. The same 5-HT2A receptor still becomes more sensitive in their brains. The same ketone bodies still flow into the brain in place of glucose. Hunger did not only shape your brain, it shaped the very civilization that raised you. You are living in a world built by hunger. So yeah, return to the opening moment. 3 in the afternoon, the refrigerator open, the irritable hunger clawing in your stomach. But this time, with new awareness, that hunger is no longer the old hunger. The hunger you feel right now is the same language the female shaman in the Galilee cave used to speak with the gods 12,000 years ago. The same molecular machine that Osumi spent decades looking through a microscope before he could name it. The same emergency mode of the brain that 2 million years of natural selection stamped into you, without asking whether you wanted it, without needing your consent. It is simply there, waiting. You do not need to bury yourself in a stone chamber like Tetsumonkai. You do not need to vow sallekhana like King Nitamaga. You do not need to go up the mountain for 4 days like a Lakota youth waiting for a spirit animal to appear. But that machine, that capacity, is still intact inside you. Not lost, not broken, only waiting. The mother tongue you have forgotten how to pronounce. Maybe the next time hunger appears at 3 in the afternoon, you will not extinguish it immediately. Maybe you will just sit with it, for 10 minutes only, and listen to what it is trying to say. You belong to a 2 million year chain of those who hungered and saw. That language is still inside you. You have only forgotten how to listen. If this story has made you look at your own hunger even a little differently, hit the subscribe button so you do not miss the next episode, because there are truths about the human species that once you have heard them, you can never look at the world the old way again.